The grand palace of the Virala Empire stood silent under the silver moons. It was a place that once sang with the voices of 1,000 nobles, glowing banners, and the hum of advanced machines. But tonight all of that had faded into cold quietness. Every hall, every guard, every servant held their breath. Their beloved ruler, Queen Irina, was dying. She lay on a floating crystal bed in the center of her royal chamber. Around her stood healers, doctors, and scientists from across the galaxy, their glowing instruments scanning her frail body. Her once bright skin now flickered with weak blue light, her veins pulsing with poison. The toxin spreading through her was of unknown origin, one that ignored every cure, every antidote, every piece of alien technology they had. None of the great minds of her empire could stop, and none of the warriors who loved her could fight it, and none of her advisors dared to speak of what would happen. When she was gone, the empire was vast, 50 star systems and hundreds of planets under her rule. But without her it would fall into chaos. For Queen Irina was not just a ruler. She was a symbol of unity, a mother to her people, and now she was fading, breath by breath. In the far corner of the massive chamber, a human janitor quietly pushed his cleaning cart. His name was Evan Cole. He was not important, at least not to anyone here. He had come from a small blue world called Earth, far on the edge of known space. The Virellans had hired humans for low work, cleaning, maintenance, carrying supplies, because humans could survive in nearly any condition, worked hard and complained little. Evan didn't understand their language well. He didn't even know why they needed him in this room tonight. Maybe it was because the royal medics had dropped so many tools and bottles in panic. Maybe someone just shouted orders and he followed without thinking. He had been cleaning the same hallway every night for months, quiet, unseen, invisible. He never imagined he'd be standing in the same room as the most powerful being in the galaxy. From where he stood, he could see the Queen's face. Pale, sweating, her once bright eyes half closed. The alien healers spoke quickly, their glowing hands moving across her skin, but their expressions were dark. One by one they began lowering their tools, whispering among themselves. "It's over," one said softly in their strange musical tone. Evan didn't know the words, but he understood the feeling. The air itself felt heavier. Then came the cry, one that echoed through every corridor of the palace. "The Queen. She is dying." Evan froze where he stood. His heart beat faster, though he didn't know why. He had never met this woman before. He didn't even belong in her world. But watching her struggle, something deep inside him ached. Something human. Something that couldn't just look away from someone suffering. A group of royal guards rushed in, their armor glowing like molten silver. One of them brushed past Evan so hard that his mop slipped, clattering against the floor. A vial, a small container of blue liquid, rolled off a healer's tray and shattered near his feet. Evan bent down quickly to clean it up before anyone shouted at him. His hand was shaking as he picked up the shards. The floor was slick and the glowing fluid spread across the tiles. And that's when it happened. He lost his balance for just a second, a single, stupid second, and his hand fell against the Queen's arm. Her skin was burning hot. He gasped and tried to pull away, terrified, but something strange pulsed through him, a soft hum, a faint warmth like electricity under his skin. For a moment, everything around him went silent. The alien healers turned in shock. The Queen's body, moments ago still and fading, suddenly twitched. Her eyes opened slightly, glowing brighter than before. The blue veins on her neck began to fade. The guards raised their weapons toward Evan, shouting in their language. He raised his hands, panicked. "Wait! I didn't mean to. I swear I didn't mean to." But before anyone could touch him, the Queen spoke. Her voice was weak, trembling, but clear enough for all to hear. "Human. Stay." The room fell silent. The guards froze. The healers looked at each other, unsure of what they had just witnessed. The Queen, their dying queen, was breathing steadily again. Her skin was glowing brighter with each passing second. Evan stood there, heart pounding, confused and afraid. He didn't know what he had done, but one thing was certain. In that single accidental touch, everything had changed. That night, the janitor from Earth had unknowingly rewritten the fate of an empire. The entire royal chamber froze like time itself had stopped. The guards still held their weapons at Evan, their glowing eyes wide in shock. The healers had stopped breathing. Even the sound of the Queen's weak heartbeat seemed louder than anything else. A moment ago, Queen Irina was dying. Her pulse was fading, her body nearly gone cold. But now before their eyes the impossible was happening. The faint blue glow in her veins began to fade, replaced by her natural golden shimmer. Her chest rose and fell in deep, steady breaths. The monitors around her bed, once flashing red in warning, now turned green. One by one. Nobody understood it. And at the center of it all stood Evan Cole, the human janitor from Earth, pale, confused, and shaking. He was still kneeling beside her bed, his hand half raised, unsure whether to run or stay. The guards shouted in their alien language, their voices sharp and furious. One moved closer, pressing a long silver spear to his chest. "Don't move!" The tone clearly warned, even if Evan didn't know the words. I didn't mean to touch her," he stammered, panic filling his voice. She was right there. I slipped, I swear." But before the guard could strike him, a voice, soft but firm, cut through the air. "Stop," said Queen Irina. The entire room fell silent again. Every being in the hall froze as the queen slowly turned her head toward the human. Her golden eyes were half open, weak but full of life once more. It was like a star had returned from the dark. The lead healer dropped to his knees, stammering something that sounded like a prayer. "My queen. You live," Irina took a breath and whispered again. "Human, stay." The guards hesitated. None dared to disobey their queen, not even in her fragile state. Slowly they lowered their weapons. Evan could still feel their eyes burning into him, but he dared not move until she spoke again. One of the healers approached her, scanning her vitals in disbelief. "The toxin. It's retreating," he muttered. "Her cells are repairing themselves." This is impossible," Evan blinked. "What's happening? Did I hurt her?" The healer looked at him, his voice trembling. "No. Somehow, human, you helped her." Evan frowned, still not understanding. "Helped her? I didn't do anything." But deep inside, he could still feel something. That strange warmth running through his arm, the faint hum that had passed between them when their skin touched. It hadn't felt like a shock or pain. It had felt alive, like his heartbeat had reached into her. The medics rushed to gather data, their instruments clicking and flashing. They took samples from Evan's hand, scanned his blood, and whispered to each other in disbelief. He watched them nervously, still clutching his mop handle for comfort. He was just a janitor, a nobody. How could he have done something no alien doctor could do? Then the queen spoke again. Her voice was soft but carried a strange calm strength. "Come closer, human." Evan hesitated. The guards shifted uneasily, but when she repeated her command, he obeyed. He took small, careful steps toward her bed. The queen looked at him closely, studying his face. Her eyes were full of curiosity and gratitude. "You touched me, and the poison ran from me," she said slowly, her voice trembling but filled with wonder. "What are you, human?" He swallowed hard. "Just a janitor, ma'am. I clean floors." The queen smiled faintly, the first time anyone had seen her smile in weeks. "Then perhaps the stars have sent me the humblest healer." Her court stared in disbelief. Their proud empire had advanced medicine, ships faster than light, and technology that could rebuild planets. Yet their queen was saved by an accident, by a clumsy human who didn't even understand half of what was happening. Hours passed, and the miracle continued. The poison levels in the queen's blood kept falling. Her heartbeat grew stronger. Color returned to her cheeks. Every test, every scan confirmed it. The human's touch had somehow triggered a cure her species couldn't achieve. When the healers finally allowed her to rest, they turned to Evan. "You must not leave," one said firmly. "Until we understand what happened, you stay in the palace." Evan nodded numbly. He didn't argue. His mind was spinning too fast. He had come here to sweep floors and empty waste bins, not to save lives. Later that night, as he sat alone in the empty hallway outside her chamber, he stared down at his hand, the same hand that had touched her. It looked normal, but he could still feel that faint warmth deep inside. He couldn't explain it, but he knew. Whatever had happened between him and the queen, it wasn't an accident anymore. Inside the chamber, Queen Irina lay awake, her golden eyes staring at the ceiling. For the first time since the poisoning, she didn't feel pain or fear. She felt peace. And as the faint sound of the human's footsteps echoed down the hall, she whispered to herself, almost smiling, "Perhaps the stars do not make mistakes." The palace had never been so quiet and so alive at the same time. News of the queen's sudden recovery spread like wildfire. but nobody truly understood what had happened. The healers were astonished. Scientists were baffled. Even the Queen's advisors, usually so confident, were whispering in corners, eyes wide with disbelief. Somehow, some small, fragile human, a janitor, had saved their immortal ruler from certain death. Evan Cole sat quietly in the corner of the royal chamber, mop in hand, feeling more out of place than ever. He had never wanted attention. He had never wanted glory. He had come to the Virilan Empire to clean floors, empty waste containers, and follow instructions. And yet here he was, at the center of a miracle that no one could explain. The healers crowded around, scanning his hands, taking samples of his blood, and recording every heartbeat. Each instrument beeped and whirred as if eager to learn the secret of the human who could cure a poison no alien could touch. Evan tried to remain calm, but every glance from the glowing-eyed scientist made him tremble. You are not just human," one healer whispered, his voice trembling in awe. "Your biology? Your cells? They neutralize the toxin." Evan blinked. "I don't understand," he admitted, his voice quiet. "I just touched her. I didn't do anything." The lead scientist shook his head, disbelief written across his face. "No, human. You did more than anything we could imagine. This is beyond science. Your body, your life force, it reacted to the Queen's poison. It cured her." Evan looked at Queen Irina. She lay on her bed now, propped up by soft cushions, her golden eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. Her breathing was steady. Her color was returning. The veins that had glowed sickly blue were gone, and the faint smile she gave him. It was like sunlight breaking through a storm. I don't know why," he said softly. "Perhaps the stars wanted me alive." The Queen whispered, her voice trembling but calm. Perhaps it was not meant to be otherwise. Her court stared in silence. These were beings who had built empires, who had mastered star systems, who had invented medicines that could heal almost anything. And yet, a simple human touch had saved the life of their queen. There was awe, shock, and fear all mingled together. A single human had reminded them of something they had long forgotten. Power was not only measured in knowledge or technology, but in courage, kindness, and life itself. As the hours passed, Evan stayed near the Queen's chamber. Guards had been told not to harm him, healers were still studying him, and even the Queen herself occasionally called him to her side. She wanted to understand him, not just the human body that had cured her, but the human who had walked through her halls so humbly, so quietly, and yet carried a force stronger than any weapon. During one quiet moment, Evan found himself sitting beside the floating bed. "I'm just a janitor," he said quietly. "I don't know why this happened. I wasn't special. I was just lucky, I guess." Queen Irina reached out, her hand brushing his. "You are not just lucky, human. You carry life in your touch. You remind me of hope, of simple things, earth things maybe, that I had long forgotten in this empire of gold and power." Evan swallowed, unsure what to say. He had spent his whole life cleaning, following rules, and trying not to be noticed. He had never imagined someone like a queen, a being of immense power and wisdom, would talk to him like a friend, like an equal. He smiled weakly. I just didn't want you to die." For a long moment the Queen said nothing. Then she smiled fully for the first time in many weeks. "That is enough, human. That is all that is needed." Word of the miracle began to spread outside the palace walls. Citizens whispered about the human who had healed the Queen. Nobles and ambassadors from distant worlds speculated endlessly. Some said it was divine intervention. Others said it was the work of an unknown alien force. But in truth, nobody could explain it, not even the Queen herself. Evan didn't care about fame. He didn't care about stories or legends. He only cared that the Queen, the person who had been dying just days ago, was alive. He had done what he could, and that was enough. But the Queen, watching him, understood something the entire empire had yet to see. In this small, fragile human there was courage, humility, and a power greater than any weapon, any technology, any science. He had walked through her halls unnoticed and quiet, and yet he had changed the fate of her empire forever. That night, Evan sat outside her chamber, mop leaning against the wall, hands folded in his lap. Inside, the Queen rested, her golden eyes closing in peace. But even in sleep, she was aware of him. the human who had saved her. And she knew deep in her heart that the Empire would never be the same again, not because of machines or armies, but because of a single human who had touched her hand by mistake. And somewhere deep within her, a thought lingered like a star in the night sky. Perhaps humanity was more than fragile. Perhaps it was stronger than she had ever imagined. Days passed since the miraculous event. The palace, usually filled with rigid ceremony and endless chatter, felt different. It was quieter, yes, but warmer somehow. The Queen's recovery continued, steady and strong, and the presence of the human janitor, Evan Cole, had become impossible to ignore. At first, the guards and healers had been wary. Why was a lowly human allowed to remain in the royal chamber? Why was he even near the Queen after such a miracle? Some whispered that he was dangerous. Others said he was a gift. Evan himself remained awkward, uncertain how to act. He had never wanted attention. He had never wanted recognition. He had only wanted to keep his head down and do his work. But the Queen, she had different ideas. "Come," she said one morning, her golden eyes bright and curious. "Sit with me." Evan hesitated. Guards tensed, but the Queen waved them back. Slowly, cautiously, he stepped forward and took a seat on the edge of her floating bed. His mop leaned against the wall, forgotten. "You are quiet," the Queen said. "Do you not speak much, human?" Evan shrugged. I usually just clean. I don't talk to people much." The Queen laughed softly, a sound that seemed to echo through the palace like sunlight breaking through glass. "Then perhaps it is time to speak. Tell me about your world. Tell me about your life. Even the smallest things matter," and so he began. He spoke of Earth, a small planet of blue oceans and green forests. He told her about coffee, bitter and warm, mornings spent walking under rain, children playing in parks, the smell of baked bread. The Queen listened, fascinated. Her life had always been about ruling, about politics, about survival. She had never imagined such simple joys could exist. Yet here was this human describing them with such wonder and honesty, and she could feel it in her chest, a warmth she had thought lost. "You speak of things that are strange," she said, "but I feel them. I feel their weight, their beauty." Evan smiled shyly. I guess we humans notice small things. It's all we have sometimes." Over the following days, a bond grew between them. The Queen invited him to sit by her side while healers studied his blood. She asked him questions about his life, his family, his world, his dreams. And he, in turn, learned about her fears, her hopes, the burden of ruling an empire that spanned 50 star systems. He learned that behind her golden eyes, behind the shining robes and floating throne, there was a being who had been lonely, who had carried grief silently for decades. They laughed together. Quiet chuckles first, then full, bright laughter that startled the courtiers. Guards who had once been wary found themselves smiling when they passed him in the hall. Scientists whispered that the bond between the Queen and the human might explain why the poison had fled her body. Perhaps it was not just his touch, but the life he carried, the heart he held, the kindness he gave so freely. Rumors began to ripple through the empire. People spoke in hushed tones about the human janitor who had healed the Queen. Some called him a miracle. Others said he was chosen by the stars. But in truth, neither science nor superstition mattered. What mattered was the connection between the two of them, a fragile, quiet bond that reminded everyone in the palace that life, even in the coldest of empires, could still surprise them. One evening, the Queen asked Evan to stay with her after the healers left. They sat side by side on the floating bed, looking out at the twin moons of their world. The golden glow of her skin reflected softly against the polished walls, and Evan felt for the first time that he belonged somewhere. "I don't understand why the stars chose me," he said quietly. The Queen placed her hand gently on his. "Perhaps they did not choose you. Perhaps they only reminded me that hope can come from the smallest, humblest places." Evan swallowed. I'm just me. I didn't do anything special." "You saved me," she replied simply. "That is everything." From that night on, their bond deepened. It was unspoken but powerful, a human and a queen, an impossible friendship that bridged worlds and species. Where the empire had been cold, a spark had appeared. Where the Queen had been lonely, warmth returned. And where Evan had felt small, unimportant, and unseen, he now realized something extraordinary. Even a single human, quiet and humble, could change the course of an empire. And as the twin moons reflected in their eyes, the palace seemed to hum softly with life, a life that would never be the same again, all because of a simple touch, a shared smile, and a bond that even the stars could not ignore. Peace in the palace was fragile, almost fragile enough to break with the faintest touch. Queen Irina had regained her strength, and Evan Cole, the human who had healed her, had become a quiet fixture in the halls. Guards still eyed him warily, scientists still studied him, and courtiers whispered behind closed doors. But for the queen, the human was no longer just a miracle. He was a friend, a constant presence who reminded her that hope could come from the smallest and most unexpected places. That calm did not last. Late one night, the palace alarm screamed through the halls. Red lights flashed across polished floors, echoing off the high ceilings. Evan froze, heart pounding, as guards rushed past him, shouting in rapid alien syllables he did not understand. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He followed instinct, moving quickly toward the queen's chamber. Smoke curled from one of the hallways, and sparks rained down from damaged energy panels. Someone had breached the palace. The queen's advisors and guards had been complacent, trusting in the safety of the inner sanctum. But now shadows moved in the gardens outside her windows, and the smell of danger burned in the air. The assassin who had poisoned the queen, or someone sent by the same hidden enemy, had returned. Evan's hand shook, but he didn't run. He had no weapons, only his mop, but somehow he felt a strange steadiness within himself. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps it was courage, but he knew that if he didn't act, the queen's life would once again be at risk. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and cloaked, moving with deadly precision. It was not a monster, not a stranger from a distant world, but one of the queen's own advisors. A man who had coveted her throne, who had whispered poison into ears and plotted in secret. His eyes were narrow and filled with malice. "You dare bring your filth into my empire?" the traitor hissed, pointing a plasma blade toward Evan. "A human sitting beside a queen? You will regret this." Evan froze for just a heartbeat. He knew he could not run. He had saved her once before by accident. This time he would have to act intentionally. The traitor lunged forward, the plasma blade slicing through the air. Evan swung his mop with all the strength he had, not to strike but to block and deflect. Sparks flew as metal met energy, and the hall echoed with the clash. The fight was chaotic. Guards tried to intervene, but the traitor moved faster than any of them had expected. Evan, small and human among these alien warriors, kept his ground. He ducked, rolled, and swung blindly, relying on instinct more than skill. Every strike of the mop was a desperate prayer, every movement a hope that the queen would not be harmed. Finally, in a desperate maneuver, Evan managed to knock the blade aside, sending it clattering to the floor. The traitor stumbled, off balance, and that gave the palace guards just enough time to subdue him. Chains of energy locked around the traitor's wrists, and he struggled in fury, but he could not escape. The queen rushed to Evan's side, her golden eyes wide with both fear and relief. "Evan, you could have died," she whispered, trembling. He wiped sweat from his forehead, his chest heaving. I couldn't let them take you," he said softly. "Not again." Her hand found his, warm and steady. "You have saved me twice now, human. You are more than a janitor. You are my shield, my reminder that life is not only strength and power, but also courage and heart." The halls were still tense, the shadows gone, but the echo of danger lingered. The queen's advisors looked at Evan with new respect and fear. This human, fragile, small, seemingly ordinary, had faced death to protect their ruler. He had acted when no one else could, proving something impossible. Courage was not measured by species, by size, or by training. It was measured by the heart. Later, Evan sat quietly in the corner of the chamber, exhausted but alert. The queen's presence near him was calm, yet full of gratitude. Guards whispered among themselves, acknowledging silently that the human who had once been invisible was now the reason their queen lived. That night, the palace slept uneasily. But the queen did not worry. She had seen courage, true and human, with her own eyes. And she knew, as long as Evan was near, there was hope. And somewhere deep in her mind, she thought, perhaps the universe had been waiting for someone like him all along. Small, humble human, to show that even in a galaxy of power, one life could make all the difference. The palace had changed. Where once there had been formality and distance, Now there was a quiet hum of curiosity, whispers of astonishment, and an unspoken awe for the human who had healed the queen. Even the most hardened advisors and generals could not ignore the truth any longer. Evan Cole, the janitor from Earth, had saved the life of their most powerful ruler. Not once, but twice, Queen Irina sat upon her throne, her golden eyes sweeping across the gathered council. The entire court had been summoned. Every noble, every diplomat, every advisor, even those who had once doubted the human, now waited, holding their breath. Evan stood at the side of the throne, his hands folded in front of him, uncertain of what he was doing here. He had not asked for recognition. He had not asked to be noticed. All he wanted was to continue doing his work quietly, far from attention. But today, the queen insisted, and the room fell silent in anticipation. "My people," she began, her voice strong, steady, and commanding. "The events of recent days have shown us something extraordinary. The human you see beside me and Evan Cole is not merely a janitor. He is the reason I live. He is the reason this empire remains whole, and his actions speak louder than any of our weapons, laws, or titles." A murmur ran through the crowd. Nobles exchanged shocked glances. Diplomats leaned forward. Guards stiffened. Humans were rare in this empire, let alone being placed beside the throne, let alone being honored by the queen herself. Evan's heart pounded. He had never been praised, never imagined a moment like this. He glanced at the queen, unsure what to do. She gave him a small, reassuring nod, a gesture that said, "It's your moment." "Even if you don't see it," the queen continued, "this human has shown us that strength is not measured by power alone, but by courage, kindness, and the willingness to act when others cannot. He saved me from death when science and magic both failed. He risked his life to protect me from a traitor when others hesitated. He has reminded us all of a truth we have long forgotten. Even the smallest life can carry the greatest power." The chamber erupted in astonishment. Nobles whispered urgently, some bowing deeply, others simply staring. The healers who had once studied Evan in disbelief now looked at him with awe. The guards, once skeptical, now nodded in silent respect. Evan stepped forward hesitantly. His voice shook as he spoke. I didn't do anything special. I didn't want her to die. I didn't want to watch her suffer. That's all." The queen reached out, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You saved more than my life, Evan. You reminded me and this entire empire of what it means to care, to act without fear, and to hope. Your humility does not diminish your greatness. It enhances it." For the first time in the chamber, a wave of applause and approval rose from the nobles. Even those who had opposed the human's presence clapped, recognizing the courage, the sacrifice, and the unassuming heroism of this small, quiet man from a distant blue planet. The queen rose, her golden robes shimmering in the soft light, and declared, "From this day forward, Evan Cole shall hold the title of Guardian of the Throne. Though he is not of our species, he embodies the spirit that this empire should always honor: courage, loyalty, and the willingness to put life above self." Gasps filled the room. Murmurs of disbelief mixed with admiration. The human who had walked the palace halls unnoticed now stood honored, acknowledged by the ruler of 50 star systems. Evan felt a warmth in his chest he had never known. He had done nothing to seek fame, nothing to earn reward, yet here he was, recognized not for wealth or rank, but for the simplest, most profound of reasons: he had saved a life. Later, when the chamber had emptied, the queen called him to her side. "Do you understand, human?" she asked softly. "You are not just a janitor. You are the reason we live to see another day. You have taught us all a lesson that no book or law could ever explain." Evan shook his head, feeling overwhelmed. I'm just me," he whispered. "Just you," the queen repeated with a smile. "And that is enough. You are extraordinary, Evan, remember that." As he looked out at the palace walls, the floating gardens, the glowing corridors, Evan realized something profound. It was not titles or technology that defined greatness. It was courage. It was kindness. It was humanity, and in that moment, he understood that even a single human, small and fragile, could change the course of an entire empire. And the queen, watching him, knew this truth too. In saving her, he had also saved the heart of the empire. Years passed, yet the story of Evan Cole, the human who saved the Virellan queen, did not fade. Across the 50 star systems of the Empire, children learned about him in school. Bards sang songs of his courage, and scholars wrote about his miracle. Even distant planets, worlds that had never known a human, spoke his name with respect and awe. Evan himself had never sought fame. He still walked the palace halls quietly, his mop now more a symbol than a tool, leaning in corners as he went about his work. But he no longer felt invisible. The Queen's smile, her nods of acknowledgement, and the quiet trust she placed in him every day were more than he had ever hoped for. He had become part of something bigger than himself, part of a living, breathing empire, yet he remained, at heart, the same humble janitor from Earth. Queen Irina had changed too. She was stronger, wiser, and more open than ever before. The memory of death and poison had humbled her, and the human who had saved her reminded her daily that greatness was not only in power or knowledge, but in courage, in heart, in simple acts of kindness. She had learned to trust more, to laugh more, and to see the beauty of life in ways she had long forgotten. One evening, Evan sat by the floating window of the palace, looking out at the twin moons. The stars shimmered across the dark sky, silent witnesses to all that had passed. Queen Irina joined him, her golden eyes reflecting the moon's light. "You've changed me," she said softly. "Not just my life. My heart, my empire, everything. And I will never forget it." Evan shook his head. "I didn't do anything special. I just touched your hand. That's all." She laughed softly, a sound warm and gentle like sunlight on water. That touch was enough to change the course of history. Never underestimate yourself, human. What you did was more than medicine, more than chance. It was humanity. For a long moment they sat in silence, sharing the quiet comfort of companionship that needed no words. In the halls of the palace, whispers spoke of him as the guardian of the throne, but to the Queen he was more than a title. He was a friend, a reminder of hope, a living testament to courage, humility, and the unexpected strength of a human heart. The Empire flourished. Conflicts that might have torn planets apart were smoothed with diplomacy and reason. Citizens of all species began to see humans in a new light. Fragile, yes, but capable of bravery and compassion beyond imagination. Stories of Evan Cole reminded them that even the smallest and seemingly weakest could alter destinies. Years later, the Queen addressed her people one last time before stepping down from the throne. Thousands gathered to hear her, their eyes shining with devotion. She spoke of war, of peace, of triumphs and failures. And then her gaze found Evan. She raised her hand, and the crowd followed her gesture, all eyes on him. "This human," she said, her voice clear and strong, reminded all of us that life is precious. That courage is not measured in strength or armies, but in acts of selflessness and kindness. He saved my life, and in doing so, he saved the heart of this empire. Let his example guide you always." Evan's cheeks burned as applause washed over him. He looked at the Queen, who smiled gently, her eyes reflecting pride and warmth. He had never imagined such a moment. He had never sought it. And yet, here he was, honored not for wealth, not for power, but for simply being human. That night, he walked through the quiet palace halls, the soft glow of the moons lighting his path. The memories of the past, the poison, the fear, the accidental touch, played in his mind. He realized something profound. Life was fragile, unpredictable, and sometimes terrifying. But it was also beautiful, full of opportunities to make a difference, even in the smallest ways. He paused outside the Queen's chamber. She had already retired for the night, resting in peace. He smiled quietly to himself. In her life, he had been a miracle. But in his life, she had given him something equally precious: purpose, friendship, and the knowledge that even one human could matter more than entire fleets or armies. As he gazed up at the stars, he whispered softly, almost to himself, "Sometimes, a little kindness is all the universe needs." And in the vast expanse of the galaxy, that small, simple truth echoed farther than any weapon, brighter than any star. Humanity had been fragile, yes, but in Evan Cole, it had shown its greatest power, the power to heal, to protect, and to inspire. The Queen slept peacefully. The Empire thrived, and the janitor from Earth, once unseen, unnoticed, had changed the fate of a galaxy. In that moment, it was clear to all who would come to know the story. Greatness is not always born of strength. Sometimes it is born of a human heart, and that heart, simple and humble, had saved them all.